And welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Today's chapters are 1 Samuel 28 and 29. Rather disturbing passages of scripture. And so I found myself a rather disturbing location for you to have this devotional shot. Here's a charming old house that's been deserted for many years now and is in a serious state of disrepair. And the locals around here, this is quite close to where I live, called it the haunted house. So how does this story go? The Philistines have decided to take on the Israelites. King Achish of the Philistines goes to David, says, listen, you're living with us. If we take on your people, you're going to ride with me. David says, I'll ride with you. He says, well, then I'll make you a bodyguard for life. They camp up against the Israelites. Saul sees them. He's terrified. He calls out to the Lord. Nothing. No answer from God. So he says to his advisors, find me a medium. Find me a witch. I need to hear what's going to happen tomorrow. But obviously it was difficult to find because he had cast them all out of the land. Anyway, at a place called Endor, there was a woman living there. There's a couple of women living here, actually. Very old ladies living in these derelict buildings. I'm sure coming to visit them at night would be an interesting prospect. So anyway, he put some disguise on himself because obviously being the king, it was going to, stop a medium in its tracks because they were banned. And he says, call up for me Samuel. Well, when this spirit approximating Samuel comes up from the grave, the woman is terrified. She says, you've deceived me. You are Saul. And so he says, I was in a jam. You're going to be all right. Don't worry. I'm not going to kill you. And he talks to Samuel, or this spiritual being. And Samuel says to him, why have you disturbed me? He says, well, God wasn't speaking to me. And then he says, well, listen, tomorrow, you and your son are going to be where I am. And your kingdom is getting removed from you. Well, Saul is devastated. He bows down on the floor. He stops eating. Eventually, the witch gives him some food, and that's the end of that chapter. Chapter 29, the Philistines are riding to take on the Israelites. And the commanders say to King Achish, what is David and his troops doing here? Send him back to Philistine. He could turn on us in the heat of battle. David's, indignant. He says, I've done nothing wrong. The king says, I know, you've been an impeccable resident in our land, but you're going to have to go back. And so David, from the Philistine side of the border, watches. And we'll see in the next two chapters what happens to Israel at the hands of the Philistines. But the big question here is not about a battle plan or what's going on with David. It's what's going on with this witch. And what about Samuel? Did a witch really call Samuel up from the grave? Well, Bible scholars have three main explanations for this. The one that, witches, just like magicians and so on, can make something appear and it was fabricated. Hardly likely, though, but given the fear of this witch when this apparition arrived. Secondly, it could be a demon. It could well be a demon. And people argue that because, why would God speak this way? Saul came to him the correct way and God didn't talk to him. But why would God speak to him through this way, which has been banned in the scripture? And then also, it didn't really happen the way this apparition said. The Philistines didn't really kill Saul. Saul killed himself. And then the third one is that this could well be Samuel. Because it's pointed out in, Luke 16 that the place where dead people waited before the cross was a place called Abraham's bosom, or a waiting place before the cross. And, after all, Elijah and Moses pitched up to see Jesus at the transfiguration. Maybe this was. But if that was the case, we've got to be absolutely certain of this. Samuel wasn't obedient to a witch, to a medium. God would have just said, this rebellious king, I'm going to talk to him on his turf. So, whatever way it is, I think what we need to make absolutely certain is that this in no way endorses going to read tarot cards, palm readers, etc., because in Deuteronomy, Moses makes this very clear. There shall be no one found among you who burns their son, or who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or sorcery, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or anyone who inquires of the dead. So, Ouija boards, palm readers, fortune tellers. It's all an abomination to the Lord. If you want to know anything about the future, you go to the Lord himself. You rest that he's got the future in his hands, that he's in charge of history and of the future. And so if this was Samuel really coming up from Abraham's bosom, he wasn't coming up under the instruction of a witch. It was God saying, you got to go and talk to this evil man in this particular way. But it is in no way an endorsement of this sort of activity. Well, as you read this chapter, I trust that God speaks to you.